Have you ever been afraid of something and you didn't even know why? Not the obvious fears like snakes or falling or public speaking. I'm talking about the quieter fears, the kind that sit just beneath the surface, the ones that whisper to you late at night when everything else is still. The fear of being alone, the fear of not mattering anymore, the fear of change, or maybe the fear of finally becoming who you truly are. We all carry fear in some form. No one escapes it. It might shift with age, it might soften or hide, but it never completely disappears. And yet, for something so universal, most of us were never really taught how to face it. We were taught how to avoid it, how to hide it, how to power through it or pretend it doesn't exist. But Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who spent his life exploring the depths of the human soul, had a very different perspective. He believed that fear isn't just something to overcome. He believed it's something to understand. And that, without that understanding, fear will quietly control us from the shadows. Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." And fear, more than almost anything else, grows strongest when it's ignored. I remember sitting with a friend named Walter, a man in his early 70s who had recently lost his wife. They had been married for over 40 years. And while he was doing his best to put on a brave face, he admitted that he was afraid. Not just being alone, but of what being alone might reveal. He said, "I'm scared of what's inside me now that I don't have anyone else to focus on." That honesty hit me hard, because it was the kind of fear many people feel but never speak aloud. The fear of meeting yourself in the silence, of finally having to face the parts of your heart that life had always given you a reason to avoid. Jung believed that fear is often a doorway, not a barrier. But most of us, when we approach a door that feels cold or unfamiliar, turn away. We retreat. We tell ourselves that maybe this isn't the right time. Maybe we're too old, or too tired, or too fragile. But deep down, we know the truth. The door is there for a reason. Sometimes fear is not a warning to turn back. Sometimes it's inviting you to step through. And here's where it gets interesting. Jung didn't think that fear was our enemy. He believed it was a messenger, a guide. He called it the shadow, a part of our psyche that holds everything we reject or deny about ourselves. Not just our anger or jealousy or regret, but also our power, our potential, our unlived dreams. Think about that for a moment. What if the fear you've been carrying isn't trying to destroy you? What if it's trying to get your attention? I once knew a woman named Maria who had always wanted to paint. She used to sketch in notebooks as a young girl, but somewhere along the way, life convinced her that it wasn't practical. It was selfish to pursue something just because it brought her joy. So she put it away, raised her children, worked hard, did everything she was supposed to do. But then, in her late 60s, that desire came rushing back. She didn't know why. She hadn't picked up a brush in over 40 years, but suddenly the thought of not painting felt scarier than trying. That fear, once so quiet, had grown loud enough that it couldn't be ignored. And she realized something. She wasn't afraid of failing. She was afraid of never even starting. That's how the shadow works. It waits, it watches, and then, at just the right moment, it knocks. Fear is often misunderstood because we think it means danger. But more often than not, fear means change. Fear means growth. Fear means something inside you is being asked to evolve. And when you ignore that, it doesn't go away. It goes underground. It finds other ways to speak. Maybe through anxiety, or anger, or a sense of restlessness that no amount of distraction can fix. But when you turn toward it, with curiosity instead of shame, something amazing begins to happen. You begin to see that your fear is not bigger than you. It's a part of you that has been waiting to be seen. Jung believed that one of the greatest journeys of our lives is learning to integrate the shadow, not by conquering it, but by listening to it, by asking, "What are you trying to teach me?" I know this can sound a little abstract, but let's bring it back to something simple. Think of a moment in your life when you felt afraid to speak your truth. Maybe it was in a relationship where you didn't want to cause tension, or in a workplace where you feared rocking the boat. Maybe it was even with your own family, where staying silent felt safer than being honest. What would have happened if you had listened to that fear, not as a warning, but as a guide? What if it was telling you that your truth matters, that your voice deserves space, that your needs, not too much? So many of us have been taught to avoid conflict at all costs. But Jung believed that healing doesn't happen through avoidance. It happens through confrontation, not violently or aggressively, but courageously and honestly. To overcome fear, you must be willing to meet the part of yourself that you've been afraid to look at. And that part is often young, often wounded, often misunderstood, but it is also wise. And once you acknowledge it, it becomes an ally, not a threat. Jung once described the process of facing fear as walking into a cave and finding treasure inside. He wasn't being poetic. He was being literal, because the treasure is always there. But only those willing to face their fear will ever find it. Maybe the fear you feel now is about growing older, about being forgotten, about losing relevance. These are real fears, but they are not final truths. What if the universe has been quietly preparing you your whole life to meet this version of yourself with more compassion than ever before? What if this season of your life is not about decline, but about deepening? You are not past your prime. You are in the middle of a transformation, and fear is simply part of the path. Not to scare you, but to wake you up, to remind you that something inside you still matters, still longs, still wants to be seen. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to stay curious. You just have to keep walking toward the questions. Because fear loses its power the moment you stop running from it. And when you look it in the eye, with love and not judgment, you might be surprised at what it has been waiting to show you all along. Fear often arrives not when life is at its hardest, but when life is asking the most of us. Not because we are weak, but because something is stirring, something new is trying to grow, and the fear is there to test whether we're ready to let it in. Carl Jung understood this well. He knew that fear is not an accident. It is the soul's way of calling attention to a place that needs healing. And not just healing in the sense of fixing what's broken, but healing in the deeper sense of reclaiming something you've forgotten about yourself. Something vital, something alive. There's a story I once heard about a man named Samuel. In his younger years, he had been full of ambition. A builder, a father, a man who believed that action was the best cure for uncertainty. But after he retired and his wife passed, he found himself face to face with a kind of fear he had never known before. The fear of stillness, the fear of not being needed. He told me, "When I was working, I didn't have time to be afraid. Now I have time, and it's all I feel." That honesty stayed with me, because so many of us carry that exact feeling. We stay busy so we don't have to feel what's under the surface. But the truth is, the fear was never the problem. The running was. Jung believed that the path to peace begins when you stop running and start listening. He called it the process of integration, bringing together all the lost and scattered parts of ourselves so we can become whole. Not perfect, just whole. And here's where it becomes personal. Think of the parts of yourself you've kept hidden, the dreams you quietly let go of, the emotions you pushed down because they didn't feel acceptable, the regrets you never voiced out loud. Fear grows in those shadows, not because you are broken, but because those parts are asking to be brought into the light. I once sat with a woman named Diane who had spent years avoiding her fear of being seen. She was quiet, kind, always supportive of others, but never quite able to share her thoughts. When I asked her what she was most afraid of, she said, "I'm afraid that if I show people who I am, they'll walk away." And yet, as she began to speak more openly, something shifted. The very thing she feared became her doorway to connection. People didn't leave. They leaned in. Because nothing is more magnetic than authenticity. The fear of being seen often hides behind the fear of rejection. But Carl Jung believed that when we deny ourselves to be accepted, we trade truth for comfort. And over time, that comfort becomes a cage. You were not born to hide. You were not born to make yourself small to keep others comfortable. You were born to become yourself, fully and without apology. And the fears that try to hold you back, they are only strong because they come from old stories. Stories that say you must earn love. Stories that say you're too much or not enough. Stories that were never yours to begin with. The moment you start questioning those stories, the fear begins to lose its grip. And you don't need to do this all at once. You don't need to transform overnight. You can begin with the smallest step. Speak your truth in one conversation. Allow yourself one moment of honesty. Choose one part of yourself that you've ignored and invite it back to the table. Fear is not something to defeat. It is something to understand. And once you understand it, once you truly see where it comes from, you begin to have power over it. Not the kind of power that fights, but the kind that heals. Jung often spoke of individuation as a kind of spiritual unfolding, not something that happens through effort, but through allowing. Allowing your true self to emerge from behind the masks. Allowing your deeper feelings to be heard. Allowing life to shape you, rather than trying to control every detail. It takes courage to let go of control. But that courage already lives inside you. There is a quiet bravery in simply being with your fear. Sitting with it, not trying to push it away, but saying, "I see you, and I am not afraid of feeling afraid." That's where the shift begins. Not in conquering, but in compassion. Imagine, just for a moment, what it would be like to live without hiding. To wake up and know that every part of you, even the messy or uncertain parts, is welcome. That your fear no longer has to be your jailer. It can become your guide. I remember a conversation with a man named Lewis. He was in his late 60s, had spent most of his life in a corporate world that rewarded logic, results, and composure. But underneath all that, he had always felt a deep creative longing. He wrote poetry in secret, never shared it, never called himself a writer. But then, after retiring, something changed. He let one person read his poems, then another. And eventually, he stood up at a local open mic night and read one to a room full of strangers. He told me afterward, "My hands were shaking. I was terrified. But afterward, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt real." Fear will always ask you to shrink. But when you answer with courage, even trembling courage, you grow. You meet yourself. You begin to live, not from your conditioning, but from your truth. Jung believed that when you step into that space, when you embrace the shadow instead of running from it, you experience a kind of inner peace that no achievement can give you. Because peace is not the absence of fear. Peace is the relationship you build with it. You can learn to walk with fear, to hear its voice but not be ruled by it, to see it not as a signal to stop, but as a signpost that you're moving toward something important. And the closer you get to that something, the louder fear might become. That's how you know you're on the right path. You are not meant to be fearless. You are meant to be free. And freedom comes when you no longer let fear make your decisions for you. You get to choose now. You get to decide what parts of yourself deserve to be reclaimed. You get to walk toward the life that has been waiting for you all along, not despite your fear, but because you are finally ready to understand it. There comes a time in life when you stop looking for all the answers out there and begin listening to the quiet truths within yourself. You begin to sense that the fear you carried for so long was never the enemy. It was only misunderstood. It wasn't there to punish or limit you. It was there to teach you something about what matters most, about where you've been wounded, where you've been silent, where you've forgotten just how strong you are. Carl Jung taught that the things we fear the most are often keys to our healing, but we must be willing to hold the key long enough to open the door. And when we do, what we find isn't a monster or some broken version of who we are. What we find is a part of ourselves we abandoned long ago. A younger self, a forgotten dream, a locked-away passion. A voice that's been waiting decades to speak. And that voice doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be heard. I once sat with a man named Frederick who had lived most of his life following the rules, doing what was expected. He was steady, reliable, kind. But he always carried a tension in his chest, like something had been left unfinished. After his wife passed and his children moved away, he found himself asking a question that had haunted him for years. What do I do now, with this version of myself I don't recognize? That question led him not to a crisis, but to a rediscovery. He started journaling each morning, not to write a memoir, but to meet himself on the page. He joined a small group at the library, not to debate or prove anything, but to hear others speak about their real fears and stories. And slowly, he realized something remarkable. He wasn't afraid of life ending. He was afraid of never fully living. Fear is tricky like that. It dresses itself up as logic. It tells you to be careful, to stay small, to avoid disappointment. But underneath that is usually a longing. And if you listen carefully enough, fear always points to something your heart still wants. Maybe you're afraid of being vulnerable again because you've been hurt before. But the deeper truth is that you still long for connection. Maybe you're afraid of trying something new because failure once made you feel worthless. But the deeper truth is that you still want to grow. Maybe you're afraid to speak your truth because you were silenced for so long. But the deeper truth is that you still want to be known. And all of these fears, when faced with honesty and gentleness, become the soil for something more powerful. They become courageous. Not the kind of courage you see in movies or hear in speeches, but quiet courage, everyday courage. The kind that wakes up and says, "Today I'll try again. Today, I won't hide. Today, I'll show up for myself." You don't need to climb a mountain or shout from a stage to be brave. Sometimes courage is just telling someone you're afraid. Sometimes it's getting out of bed when everything feels heavy. Sometimes it's sitting in your favorite chair, putting your hand over your heart and saying, "I'm still here, and that matters." Carl Jung said, "Only what is truly oneself has the power to heal." That means the healing doesn't come from outside. It doesn't come from more effort or approval or applause. It comes from the moment you say yes to your whole self. Even the scary parts, even the uncertain parts, even the parts you thought you had outgrown. That is where your strength lives. Not in perfection, not in certainty, but in the presence. And from that presence, something new always begins. It might look like returning to an old passion. It might look like reaching out to someone you've missed. It might look like telling your story for the very first time. Or simply resting, not because you're weak, but because you're wise enough to know that rest is part of healing too. When you understand your fear instead of running from it, something inside you softens. And then, like a sunrise slowly brightening a dark sky, you begin to see the world differently. The path ahead is no longer blocked. It's just waiting for your steps. You may not know what's around the next corner, and that's okay. You're not meant to know everything. You're meant to walk with your eyes open, with your heart steady, and with the quiet knowing that you are no longer ruled by fear. You have lived long enough to know that nothing is fixed. Life can still surprise you. Love can still find you. Dreams can still rise. And when fear returns, as it surely will, you'll know how to meet it. Not with shame, not with panic, but with compassion. You'll say, "I see you. Thank you for reminding me that I care, but I'm not letting you drive this time. You are the one behind the wheel now, and where you go from here is entirely up to you. So if you've been waiting for a sign that it's okay to be afraid and still move forward, let this be it. You are not alone in your fear. You are not weak for feeling it, and you are capable of walking through it. Fear is not the end of your story. Understanding it is the beginning of a new chapter. And I hope you write that chapter with boldness, with tenderness, and with the deep belief that who you are today is exactly who you need to be. If this video spoke to you, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. You never know who your story might help. And if you'd like to hear more messages like this, full of reflection, honesty, and encouragement, feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Here, we believe in the power of conversation, in the beauty of becoming, in the strength of people who have lived, lost, learned, and still keep choosing love. You are stronger than you know. You are braver than you feel. And the best part is, you're just getting started. Live fully. Walk gently. And never forget, fear may visit, but it never gets to stay.